I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, it's VLGA Connect and TGU time for Friday the 11th of August. Can you believe how quickly the weeks are getting away? And in fact, the days are getting away. Tony Rownick, I want to say hello to you first. Tony texted me late last night saying, why are there no stories in our story list for the governance update this week? And I almost said to him, because you're a day early, Tony. But Tony, you weren't. It was me.
That's right. You're enjoying yourself too much during the week. But highlight of my week, Chris and Julie, was Monday night. I did have a session with one of the Metro Council groups, but managed to see the second half of the Matildas beating Denmark. So
Yes.
Started the week off on a high, and this weekend we'll be watching them again, won't we?
Yes, 5 o'clock Saturday. Looking forward to that. Of course, Tony is from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, who sponsor that TGU, but also gives us the benefit of his legal insights to many of the things happening around the sector. Julie Reid sitting there patiently waiting to be introduced. Hello to you. How's your week been?
Very good, thanks, Chris. Hi, Tony. Highlight for me, Matilda's winning. Really excited about this weekend. It's going to be a great weekend, I'm sure.
And lots of people have been asking me to pass on their best to both of you, really enjoying the insights that they're getting from TGU as we attempt to wrap up things that are happening not just in Victoria, but around the local government sector more broadly. Never a dull moment. This week, it's all been happening down in Hobsons Bay, Tony, where we spoke last week about a councillor looking to move a notice of motion which got coverage in The Age, and it was all about opening up public question time for people, some of those particularly in relation to the TechnoPark issue, which we've talked about, the industrial zoned area where people have been living. Interesting outcome to this on Tuesday night. The council meeting was moved online for safety reasons, and the notice of motion that had been flagged didn't get off the ground because no other councillor seconded it. And of course, that means, Tony, under most councils' governance rules, if you don't get a seconder, it doesn't get discussed.
Yep, the motion lapses, as you say, and that's what happened to Daria Calendar's motion as you say, on the 8th of August. And look, just in relation to that motion, I'm sure that those behind the motion would say that it was all about more community engagement and more transparency. On the other hand, Hobsons Bay certainly already has a public question time at council meetings, but questioners must get through this filter of the questions not being defamatory, derogatory, offensive, being about confidential matters, litigation, these sorts of things. So one would sort of wonder if we're pushing for these live unscripted question sessions, what is it that people are trying to achieve? Surely we don't want these defamatory and offensive questions being asked. I think there's a risk, not at every council and not at every council meeting, but there's certainly a risk that when you have live unscripted questioning, that the meeting's going to sort of descend into something that's kind of ill-mannered and loutish, and just a bit of a circus is my view on that. And I just wonder about people who are behind this push, what they're really seeking to achieve, given that there's a process for public question time and anyone's allowed to ask a question, provided it doesn't meet that criteria of inappropriateness.
Well, it would make it very difficult for any chair, any mayor, if there weren't some parameters around those processes. And as you say, I'm not sure how many governance rules updates you've looked at in recent times, Tony, but a number of councils have tightened up those processes in response to the disruptions that have been happening and the abuse of those processes, which really, Julie, spoils it for everyone.
It does really, Chris, and it's a really difficult position, as you say, for the mayor to be in when they're trying to manage the meeting. You know, and obviously the CEOs are really concerned about the health and safety of everybody in the room. You know, nobody really deserves to be abused in front of other people. And it becomes very, very difficult, as you say, when you're getting hit with these very emotional questions that sometimes just tip over the edge of being inappropriate. And so we've got to try and manage that as best we can. And it's really hard for mayors to be able to do that. So at the end of the day, they've got to make a decision. Do they go online? What do? That they did that in this particular circumstance with the, you know, health and well-being of people in mind. You know, it just makes sense to me.
So we need to put the other side of that and some balance here. Obviously, members of the community can be frustrated with these processes that they see as barriers, as a hindrance to getting answers to questions. And the people in TechnoPark are a case in point. They had gathered, and they've been at pains to say, to conduct a peaceful process. The media's reported it as a march to the chamber. Well, it was, because they gathered in Logan Reserve in Altona and they went up Pier Street to the chamber. So it was a march, a group of people, but they were peaceful, and they wanted some of them to be able to put their questions to the council. But at the last minute, Tony, the council moved the meeting online out of fears of safety and security, I gather, which is within their right to do.
Yeah, and as the mayor of Hobsons Bay, Tony Briffa, said, she said, look, this was a difficult but necessary decision. I mean, it would have been a difficult decision that councillors and CEO would have angst about. But, you know, when we look at the Commonwealth Parliament, the Victorian Parliament, it is sort of very difficult for a group of, I gather, 150 people to be able to, you know, come into the gallery, particularly with banners and those sorts of things. And they would normally need to protest outside the Parliament. And I think, you know, the council here has made a decision that, you know, this is a particularly sort of unpredictable, stressful, volatile environment. You know, we better err on the side of safety here. As you say, the meeting might have proceeded as a face-to-face meeting, and it might well have proceeded smoothly with you know, people making their point, but not being disruptive. But what if there had have been some level of disruption that led to people in the gallery for other agenda items feeling unsafe, or indeed council staff or councillors? Clearly, you know, the organisation was a bit on notice that there was a greater risk on this occasion, and I'm sure we'll see the in time the usual position of open in-person council meetings being followed in this municipality.
But I think we're going to see a trend of this happening more, because I don't think mayors and councillors will want to put up with behaviour in the chamber that puts people at risk. I think the councils are now becoming more, I suppose, braver to make those decisions. And I think we're just going to see more of this happening if we get more of this disruption.
Yeah.
Because they will say, well, enough is enough.
So, you know, the media's jumped on it and said, you know, a third council closes its public gallery over security concerns. Other councils have moved their meetings online for various reasons. So I think that's a little bit wide of the mark. I guess we've got to wait and see what happens with this TechnoPark issue. It is complex. There are elements of this that are in the state government purview. And I noticed that the local member, Melissa Horn, who's also the local government minister, has been in touch with the Premier's office looking for some sort of cross-governmental task force to work through these issues. That sounds like a sensible thing to do to try and get some resolution for these people and for the council in relation to this complex matter.
Any complex planning matter like this, where it's the rezoning of land, there needs to be all parties coming to the table, the council with the state government, working out what kind of resolution can we work our way through to try and minimise the impact on people. You know, we don't want to see people homeless. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
No, and I'm genuinely, I think the Mayor of Hobsons Bay and the council doesn't want to see people homeless either, as they've said. But let's leave it there. There's lots of information online. There's a long statement the Mayor's put out. It's been challenged by the residents with their own 6-page response. There's some media reporting. Links to all of that you can find at the Local Government News Roundup blog, and we'll keep an eye on what happens there in case there's some developments that we need to talk about. Tony, a court matter this week resulted in a win for Merri-bek City Council. I wasn't aware this was going on, but this one's been happening for quite some time.
Well, a long time, in fact, Chris and Julie. We're talking about Montford Park, it's called. It's in Brunswick there. It's a site that was an existing park and was sold in 2004 at what would seem to be a discounted price, $100,000, selling the park and an adjacent scout hall to the Dar Alorda, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, community centre, but on a proviso that the site be maintained for community use. And what in fact happened is the site was developed, and a basketball court and a volleyball court was built on the site, and ultimately the site was fenced off, and that concerned members of the public. It meant that if you wanted to access and use the basketball court or the volleyball court, you had to join the community centre, become a member, pay a fee, make a booking. And so there was, an online petition. And ultimately, after years of discussions and attempts by, I guess, council and the community centre to engage, there was this Supreme Court proceeding that council won, and the Mayor, Angelica Panopoulos, has really sort of hailed this one as a win for the community. Sort of I certainly see that. I have sympathy for both sides here. I think one of the leading people on that community centre group is a former councillor himself, Councillor Anthony Halou, or former Councillor Halou. And I do know in the past in some media he's been quoted as saying, the reason we've had to fence it off is we've had vandals trying to steal the volleyball nets or the the basketball rings, and people can still book, but we've got to charge them a fee because there's a public liability element here. So I can see the rationale on both sides, but look, this has dragged on for many years. I said 2004 was that sale or something, and it was back in 2015-16 I first read about this. So finally resolved. Finally, there's going to be a sale, an enforced sale back to the council, and presumably that will mean that the site will return to sort of unfettered community access.
I gather some of this hinged on people making applications to access that space being denied, but no clarity on the reasons for that denial. I think the judge took issue with that, didn't?
Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't see that. There you go.
Yeah, described, I think, the rejections as spurious in nature. So there's a few elements in there, and I think there's potential for an appeal still, possibly.
Yeah, certainly you can appeal a Supreme Court decision either to the full court, or from the full court, seek leave to appeal to the High Court.
So another example, Julie, of this this intersection between community access to space that is deemed to be public space. I'm reminded of the school issue in the East somewhere not that long ago with the gates, etc. Did that ever get resolved?
I don't know whether they ever got resolved.
Was that Alphington
that's the one.
Grammar? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and the access to the Yarra River. That's right.
Yes. But these are the complex issues that local government get involved in to do with public space. And at the time, it probably seems like a very good idea, trying to look at how we might be able to sort of gain some revenue from something and still obviously have access to the, by the community. But it just becomes so complex because of all of the issues, as you talked about, Tony, about, you don't anticipate there's going to be all of these issues around graffiti and, issues that the new owner might have. But it just sends alarm bells to the council really about, being careful about offloading assets in that space, because what's happened now, obviously, is, huge cost to take this and fight this in the court. I'm not too sure whether or not costs were awarded for the council, but, again, cost to the community is huge. So, it's really, it's a really difficult space for councils to be in, this kind of offloading of land.
Yeah, and I did read in that case it was the community centre that instigated the court action. So would that have a bearing on awarding of costs, or is it just depending on the outcome?
It certainly would. If you're the plaintiff and you fail, there's pretty much a presumption that you'll pick up some of the defendant's legal costs.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting one there. And before we leave court matters behind, Tony, I believe there's a matter listed today in the High Court that could or may not be related to Operation Sandon.
It's a mystery because courts sometimes, when they want the parties to an application to be confidential, they use this pseudonym AB, and so we've got a matter which is an application this morning at 10:30 being heard in the High Court in Canberra, an application for leave to appeal a decision from the full court of the Supreme Court of Victoria, I believe, in relation to IBAC.
Right.
So, it could be, we've of course had the recent IBAC Sandon report, and we know there has been litigation by some of the players there in the lead up to the public release of that report. It might be in relation to that. We don't know who the parties are. It might be in relation to another pending IBAC report that, they've certainly got a few things on their plate.
Yes.
But we'll watch that, and maybe I'm not sure what will happen given it's a confidential application.
That was going to be my question, Tony. Do we ever, as a matter of course, find out who it is and what it was, or might it remain a secret if they're unsuccessful?
It might turn on whether leave to appeal is granted or not,
right.
But I'll certainly report back to you in terms of what's posted as any report on the High Court website.
Excellent. Thanks, Tony. All right. By the time people see and hear this, there might be some sort of resolution, or at least some more information on that. Some reports this week out of Port Phillip and Fisherman's Bend that suggest that the council's gotten into a bidding war with the state government over a piece of land that has been designated as future open space, as I understand it, in the master plan for the Fisherman's Bend precinct. Australia Post owns the land, and are reported, I think this was in the Age, reported to have been in negotiations with the Department of Education to sell that site for a school. Of course, the council wants it to free up some land for sporting use. Who's going to win? I guess.
I think the state will win on that one. I hazard a guess. This is a 1.54 hectare site in Williamstown Road in Port Melbourne, and it's been used by Australia Post for the last 30 years. It is prime real estate, for not only for sporting, but obviously also for a school, potentially a school purpose. Now, this is interesting, and I want to, shout out to all of those managers of sport and recreation that are out there that spend enormous amounts of time with these community groups trying to find, a happy space for all of these groups to work together.
It's a constant challenge, isn't it, Julie? And a growing challenge.
And in this case, the Age is reporting that there's growing tensions between the footballers and the cricketers, and the popularity of AFLW is increasing, and that's creating this extra demand for this open space, and it's becoming really difficult for Port Phillip in this space to be able to have enough space for all of these groups to operate. It happens across many local governments in terms of clubs fighting for space because they're growing, constantly growing. But this one has got that complexity of there's another player, and now Port Phillip has to bid against the state government, to be able to secure the land.
So what status then does this pre-existing plan have that has identified that piece of land as open space, Tony?
Yeah, well, I think that would be what would be frustrating City of Port Phillip is that the 2018 master plan for Fisherman's Bend actually, identifies this site as for open space recreation purposes. And of course, that master plan, whilst, state government was a responsible authority for Fisherman's Bend, it was a result of, close consultation with the council. And so the council would have had an expectation here. And, as the Mayor of Port Phillip, Heather Consolo says, it'd be absurd if we end up with a bidding war between council and the state government. And as Julie says, I think it's clear who's got the deeper pocket there. It's probably not the council. This land, it's adjacent to the North Port Oval. I've played footy on that oval. It's an amazing oval. It's actually got backdrop to the sea. It's, they've played football and cricket on that oval for over 100 years. So it's a really significant site for recreation. It's the VFA club's home ground, Port Melbourne's home ground, and as you say, Julie, AFLW's boomed, and the VFLW side for Port Melbourne hasn't been able. Most of its home games haven't been able to be played in Port Melbourne because they haven't got sufficient grounds. And then you've got the cricket club who rightly have 150 years of tradition there as well, saying, well, we don't want to get kicked out for the AFL. So there's a need for more ground space.
Not an isolated case. As Julie said, many local governments tackling this. I know down in Williamstown, similar issues with cricket, football, and another site with an amazing backdrop, a coastal backdrop. But if I can digress just slightly and head up to Gympie in Queensland, I was just reading the Gympie Mayor there is up in arms at the moment because his council's received a report from an independent expert. They're expecting that report to say that there's not enough space to accommodate growing sporting needs. The independent expert has come back and said that's actually not the problem. You just need to manage those spaces better. So I can imagine how frustrating it was to receive that report. Anyway, as I say, I do digress. We'll keep an eye on that one, and hopefully we'll hear about a resolution to that in the not too distant future. I want to circle back to a story we talked about a few weeks back when Strathbogie Shire took a stand over school crossing supervisors. You might recall this. The Mayor, Laura Binks, said we're no longer feeling like we should be subsidising what is effectively a state government responsibility, and they pulled their support for school crossing supervisors. What's happened in the interim, school principals have jumped in and manned those crossings, and then 4 schools that are on state government roads have now seen supervisors come back being funded by the state government. So it's a 4 out of 5 win, I think, for Strathbogie, because there's one more school that's on a council road that the government is so far not funding a supervisor for. Anyone surprised to have seen this outcome achieved, Julie?
I'm not surprised, Chris, and no? I'm really pleased for Strathbogie that they held the ground on this one. This has been one that has upset councils for many, many years, the whittling away of the funding for school crossing supervisors. They held their ground. They've now got a good outcome, which is fantastic. They will have to decide what they're going to do with this other road, whether they decide now to pitch in for that one, I don't know, or whether they will continue to hold the ground. But look, I think it just goes to show that, if you if you take these things seriously and get the message across, then sometimes there are resolutions that work in favour of the council. So good on them.
A little sting in the tail here, as the council says, the concerns are that the funding that the state government's come forward with is not ongoing. So it's, as is fairly typical, it's probably got a finite time period on it. So they wouldn't be wanting to give up the fight just yet.
No, that's correct, Chris, and I think that they will continue to fight that one. Once the funding's in, then it's harder for them to take it away. So I think it's probably a good result.
Tony, I assume the State Department in making this decision would be well aware that there'll be a lot of other councils now pointing to that outcome and saying, okay, you need to stump up in these other places as well.
Yeah, this is right. And I think you put your finger on it. It's about, is the funding, is there continuity? Is there certainty in relation to the funding, or is this just, council having stepped in and the state government having stepped in and kind of taken some of the heat out of the conversation by, putting some funding in there for the time being on those, albeit just on the state managed roads. So there is I think the Nagambie Primary School, which is on a council managed road that hasn't as yet got its school, pedestrian crossing, man crossing supervisor back as yet. But I guess we're watching across the sector because it's a conundrum that we see, across Victoria.
To know too, Chris, about whether Strathbogie have had much feedback from the community in that situation. Did they get pushback? Did they get criticism? To be interesting to know that, to see whether there was any ramification for the council.
All right, we might reach out and see if we can find out for you on that, Julie. I was just thinking, if anyone happens to tune into this program and is unaware of the complexity and the breadth and depth of issues that are dealt with in local government, today we talked about sporting grounds, school crossing supervisors, court cases for community access. It's all over the place, because that is local government. Of course, there's the elected level that sits at the top, and we've had a couple of countback results in this week, just to run by you. Glenelg, second attempt at a countback, as the first one resulted in that successful person not coming back with the declaration of eligibility. So John Northcote, a former councillor, I think a former mayor at Glenelg, is back on the council, replacing Anita Rank. And interesting at Indigo, where Larry Goldsworthy stepped down, Larry's been replaced by Sue Gold. No, we're not saying that Sue's not worthy, but it's Sue Gold. Amazing outcome there, who's gone on to the Indigo Council. And we've got a countback scheduled now for Greater Geelong to replace Stephanie Asher. That's going to occur on the 28th of August. Before you ask, Julie, 49.
Yep. How many?
49.
We're going to crack the half century.
Yeah, we just need one more. Now, come on, someone out there. Is there a councillor out there considering that they might be going to hang it up? We need to tick over to that nice round number of 50. I'm only joking, of course. We might sit on 49 for the rest of the term. Who knows? Yeah. Let's have a look at a couple of things happening interstate that we can draw some insights from. Tony, we have talked about that curious situation in New South Wales where a councillor can run for state parliament and get elected and not have to give up their council seat until the end of the current term. And that's turning into an issue in Northern Beaches, where a former mayor has become an MP. He doesn't want to give up his seat, but the council thinks he should.
Yeah, you're talking about Michael Regan, who's the independent state member for Wakehurst now. He was very experienced councillor, initially, popularly elected as the mayor of what was the Council of Warringah back in 2008. Got re-elected then. There was an amalgamation that created this Northern Beaches Council in 2017. He gets re-elected subsequently to that in 2021. And then in March of this year, gets elected to the New South Wales State Parliament, steps down from the mayoral position in May of this year, but, has indicated that he wants to stay on as a councillor. Look, I think that, in some ways, this is going to would be not tenable. There's going to be lots and lots of occasions where one would think that there are conflicts, council, resolving to lobby, state government right to their local parliamentarians. I accept that Michael's an independent member, so he's not as sort of beholden to the majority in the parliament. But, Michael, let some of the other kids play with the toys. You can't have it all to yourself. I mean, what's next? Is he going to get on the High Court bench or something.
Well, I agree. Completely agree, Tony. You can't have it both ways. But we have this curious situation in New South Wales where it's happened, I think, on about 3 or 4 occasions in this year's election cycle. And in this case, Northern Beaches Council is saying the rules should be changed because of potential for conflict of interest, for the person in the councillor role to have their attention divided. He says he's 110% committed, but Julie, how can he possibly give 100% to 2 roles?
Well, you can't, Chris. And so, even the pub test, the perception, even in the community, they would see that there was potentially conflict there, and they would be wondering, he's getting paid for both roles. Is he really doing 100% for both roles? So it really doesn't pass the pub test for me.
Yeah.
And that's why in Victoria we have in place what we have in place to avoid that happening. So hopefully they can learn from the Victorian system.
Fascinating, the differences in the different jurisdictions, really. And I think on a lot of counts are ahead of the game. In Victoria, audit and risk committees is another one that comes to mind.
Can I say, Chris,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I say, someone's got to write a biography about this guy one day, Michael Regan. Have you followed him? He's so look, he certainly knows how to get elected, often to council and into state parliament. But back in 2014, when he was the mayor at Warringah, there was a bit of a scandal about how much money, or something like 1.2 million or something, council was spending on cars. Right. And the mayor of Warringah, Mr. Regan, had the council Jaguar. So there was a bit of a scandal about that. Then there was a scandal about his wife being in the councillor lounge after a council meeting, and some councillor took issue to that, and there was a code of conduct and all this stuff. So yeah, he's quite a colourful character, it would seem. And I imagine what he's saying, and I absolutely agree with Julie here, but I imagine what he's saying is, I'll be in there, one thing's for sure, I'll be in there fighting for the people of Northern Beaches in the parliament. And so, I'll be following through with what we say at council, but I can see all these occasions where, the state parliament's going to have to vote on things like, council rates and these sorts of things. And how does he, serve both duties adequately? I just think it's really it's impossible.
It's dangerous, isn't it? All right. So as I say, we'll keep an eye on that one. Just as a passing note, New South Wales mayors are required to be elected next month. That's if they're not directly elected, and a few of them are. But where the council chooses the mayor, the Office of Local Government has put out advice about their obligations to do that next month. And of course, it'll be for a 1-year term, not a 2-year term, as is the norm, because of course, New South Wales delayed their elections by a year due to COVID. So a bit of work coming up for the Local Government News Roundup to keep up with those mayoral election outcomes, which we'll try to do for you. South Australia, a council there has seen the need to come out and remind people or clarify people, or I think set a policy for the first time that only humans can be buried in their cemeteries. And this has arisen because of apparently, Julie, an increasing number of people who want to be buried with their pets.
And I can understand that, Chris. If you've got a dog that you love that is like your child, then, of course, in this circumstance, this lady, a Riverland resident, Sue Laidler, wanted her pet's ashes to be laid with her. And she even, I think she even had this in her will. And the council have come out saying, no, it's not possible. We don't want to have a situation where we have animal bones and I can't believe we're talking about this, human bones.
Commingling of bones.
In the cemetery. Well,
but if it's ashes, how is it an issue if it's
right.
Oh, hang on. I saw that Stephen King movie, Pet Cemetery, and the pets kept coming alive after they got buried. I'm not having that, you guys.
I haven't seen that. I don't watch horror movies, Tony.
But the beautiful thing about this report is that this University of Adelaide emeritus professor of pathology has come out, Roger Bayard, and he has said that it was a bizarre decision. And he said sorting out animal bones from humans is not a major issue.
Mm.
So he's
Yes,
saying,
you wonder how
thank
often the need.
goodness for Professor. Thank goodness for the Professor, because really, I just think that is just so it's almost tugs on the heartstrings and says, no, council, this is not a very smart decision to me.
So I'm sensing we've got a tied vote here. Julie says yes. Tony's concerned about the supernatural. So does that give me the casting vote?
It does, Chris.
It does. It does.
I think
I've
if
got to
they're
say-
ashes, I think if they're ashes, it's fine.
There are some really strict rules about cemeteries. Let me say, I know of a funeral where somebody's mobile phone dropped. They weren't on it. Apparently, it was in their hand, dropped into the grave, but after the coffin had been lowered. Now,
Right.
you think that, well, you just lift the coffin up and get the grave out. No, it's illegal to
Is it?
move a coffin after it has been placed
Wow.
in the grave, and it requires, all sorts of approvals.
So they had to
So
buy a new
lots of
phone.
stuff in lots of really, interesting rules about how cemeteries operate.
So there's an opportunity for anyone who's wanting to upgrade their phone but haven't been able to justify it.
Drop it.
No. No. Oh,
Shall we move on?
I think we should move on, but go with the animals. That's what I say.
It's trivia today, isn't it? Just trivia,
Yeah.
folks.
All right, this one's not too trivial. This is out of Queensland, Logan City Council, where an independent investigator's report has found that a councillor has committed misconduct. The independent investigator, by the way, as a side note, is Ray Burton, who'll be very well known to people in Victoria and Queensland as a long-term senior local government executive, was at Greater Shepparton back in the day. So Ray's report's been received. The council has chosen to ignore the findings, not accept the findings, and let this councillor off for their behaviour, which, Tony, relates to posts, I think, online about a private business opportunity, but on a council Facebook
I
site.
think it was about promoting a book that the council has written, but as you say, using council's Facebook page to promote that, if you like, that private enterprise, or that, but I think I saw that it was unanimous. I thought I saw that 13 councillors there. It's a big council, but not accepting.
I think it was 10. I think it was 10 that voted to not accept it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. Well, so pretty overwhelming position put by the councillors, but quite interesting to see, in the face of an independent report, to say, well, we don't accept that it was inappropriate.
And we've talked about this before. It's a curious thing in the Queensland system where a report can come to the council, but the council has the authority to accept or not accept the findings of that report and follow through or not with the recommendations. Of course, that doesn't happen here, Julie.
No, and I was actually surprised to see this. I didn't realize
it happens quite a bit.
Based in Queensland, and I don't know whether I necessarily agree with that. I think
Sounds like a state parliament.
Subject. It's subject to bias, and the council, being in a situation where they have to make a decision that could easily be influenced. So I think in those kind of cases, I'm much more in favour of the independent decision in those kind of matters. So
it does make a mockery.
Thing.
It does make a mockery of the independence of the process, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And, is it then a waste of time? Is it a waste of money to then go and get an independent report? And then, if it's fait accompli that it's, they're going to support the councillor anyway? I don't know. I'm not too sure.
I agree, but I reckon it's what happens that state government, of all persuasions, do this all the time. They receive independent reports and go, are we going to accept this or not? And
that's
they
a good
make
point.
a political call.
That's a good point, Tony, because we're right now we're waiting to see how the government responds to Operation Sandon and those 34 recommendations. And do any of us believe they'll actually adopt them all? David Wolf's pretty confident that they will. And I say that by way of plugging a new edition of VLGA Connect that we brought out this week, where we spent some time with David Wolf at IBAC, talking about what went into the production of that report and getting some reaction to the reaction, if you like, since it came out. All right, I thought that was interesting. Yes, Julie?
Really good work in working with and briefing state government officials prior to the report being released he was talking about. So, you know, he's pretty confident from his discussions that he's had with them, which is good to hear.
Yep. So it just remains to be seen how long it will take to get that that clue. In the UK, a councillor has been removed from office for not attending a meeting for 6 months. You might say, well, why are you a councillor if you don't attend a meeting for 6 months? But Tony, this councillor is a bit baffled to have been removed.
Yeah, the councillor, Sarah Harper Riches, she's had a flare up of her chronic fatigue syndrome. I think she was also indicated that, you know, she's breastfeeding a child at the time. But, you know, she also said in the media report I saw that, you know, she's been active in the community in this 6 month period. She's been, you know, out there going to community meetings and events and gathering casework for council. So one wonders why she couldn't request leave in that time as well, because there is an opportunity to have leave of absence. But anyway, the Local Government Act in the UK, a 1972 piece of legislation, says councillors are recalled if they're absent for the 6 months. And I think an underlying issue here is that you can't, I don't believe you can hold remote meetings other than during the pandemic in the UK. And there's an attempt, I think there's a bill going to the House of Commons that would change that.
That's right.
Sorry,
yeah, under certain circumstances, as I understand it, yet to be voted on. It's been opposed, I think, by the government, so it remains to be seen whether that gets through. The other issue here, Tony, is a communication issue, because apparently, you know, in normal circumstances, Julie, wouldn't you expect the council or the CEO to advise the councillor that this piece of legislation is going to be enacted if you don't attend a meeting and don't have a leave of absence? But there was no forward advice that this was coming.
No, Chris, and this is what when I read this report, I just went, this is a classic case of non-communication between the two parties.
And you know why? It's politics.
Yeah.
It's politics. So it's the political nature of that system there, where the council is led by one party and the councillor in concern was from the other party. So
right. Well, there you go. That explains it. So it's just, you know, thankfully we're not in that necessarily in that space here. And, you know, I would hope that mostly there is communication between the parties, particularly a role for the CEO to play in that as well, I think.
All right, we've gone off on a few frolics today. If there's anybody still watching or listening, it's time for the Pics of the Week. Tony, your pick of the week is from your hometown of Ballarat.
Yeah, it is. I just thought this one was really interesting. I think this week Ballarat councillors voted to ask the planning minister to call in a planning matter, which is because often it's an unusual concept that councillors would be asking the planning minister to take on the decision-making role in a matter before council. But I thought that was curious, and I delved into this. It was a 5-3 vote. There was one councillor absent, but this was about a major development in the CBD called Ballarat Gateway. It's two sort of multi-storey buildings on Lydiard Street and Mayor Street in Ballarat. And there's a pedestrian bridge proposed onto the Ballarat railway station precinct. And it would appear that council's got no jurisdiction to make decisions about that sort of key piece of community infrastructure because it's in a railway precinct there. So rather than risk council making a decision that would not be able to include this pedestrian bridge, council's asked the Minister for Planning, Sonia Kilkenny, to step in. I think it's this is an idea that's come from the applicant to make sure that the pedestrian bridge can be dealt with. And I believe that council think that there'll still be a referral authority. They'll still be able to put in to the minister whether they support or not the proposal. But we're yet to see what the minister will determine here. But it is an unusual approach, but clearly an extraordinary set of circumstances. And I see the logic. I actually now see the logic in what council has done here.
And a pretty major development from what I can tell, with a 7-story and a 5-story building as part of all of that.
Yeah.
Julie?
Oh yeah, I can see the logic in it. I can see the complexity of a pedestrian overpass like that. You know, dealing with state government departments around, you know, trying to navigate that one. So yeah, look, I think it probably makes sense, really, and hopefully a good outcome for the council.
Indeed. All right, Julie, your pick of the week. It'll be no surprise to anyone. It's out of the UK.
It is, Chris, and I'm heading over there soon. So I've got a lot of focus this year on the UK, and I'm really interested to see what's happening over there, particularly in England, but I'm also going to be having a look at what's happening in Scotland when I go over there as well. But in the UK, there's been another cyber attack, but this one was on the UK Electoral Commission, and in actual fact, it was the electoral registers for Derby City Council. But interesting with this case was that the attack was back in 2021 and 22. However, I believe that the council have only just found out, have only just been made aware of the fact that there was this cyber attack and there was a breach of all of the electoral register back at that time. So I thought it was a long time coming where the council found out about such a significant breach of the community's data. And obviously the Electoral Commission have apologised for that, and they're looking at their IT systems and how they can improve on that. But, you know, again, you know, these sophisticated hackers getting into these systems and, you know, collecting all of that data. I mean, they did sort of say, well, look, we're lucky that the voting system, the voting process wasn't actually tampered with, because we still use paper-based voting, and so that hasn't been affected. So thank goodness for that. But anyway, so there is some benefit in having some paper-based type solutions to you know, to elections. But anyway, look, an interesting case, and yeah, just a common occurrence now, really, with these cyber attacks.
Absolutely. Cautionary tale. Thank you, Julie. I've got a quick one for you that caught my eye just last night. You might have seen this on the news this week. An international student whose car was swallowed up in a sinkhole on the Gold Coast. This was quite extraordinary. You would never expect this to happen. And the council has apparently refused to cover the cost of this woman's loss of car. She didn't have comprehensive insurance, apparently due to the cost of living crisis, needing to make ends meet. Well, apparently Tom Tate, the Mayor of the Gold Coast, has stepped in and overruled the council, and they're going to pick up the costs of replacing her car, which is very nice of Tom. Thoughts on the precedent that sets?
Yeah, I guess there aren't a lot of sinkholes occurring in the Gold Coast, hopefully. So so hopefully it's not too much of a, you know, regular circumstance. But even if this lady had insurance, one wonders whether you know, there would be in the you know, the fine print whether something like this would be covered. So yeah, I understand the you know, the feelings of councillors of sympathy for the person in this situation. Wow, a sinkhole.
Yeah,
What next?
it's a very unique circumstance, but interestingly, I have had a sinkhole in my life in local government. So
Really?
I often use that as an example of the myriad of challenges that we deal with in local government, everything from sinkholes to behaviours to, you know, delivering over 100 different services. So you're right in what you said early on, Chris. There's a lot the local government has to deal with.
Complex. And guess what? There's a sinkhole opening up underneath us right now, and we're going to disappear into it for another week. Julie, thank you as always. Have a great week.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Tony, and to the team at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers for your support. I hope you have a good one too.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you both next week for more TGU from VLGA Connect. Thanks for watching. Now, before we do go, a quick plug. Check out the newest episodes that are coming to you from VLGA Connect. There's a lot of content at the moment. We've been talking to people around the sector for the Local Leaders series, Jim McGee and Isabel Tolhurst, the most recent episodes of that. Tony Cercelli, who's the reasonably new CEO of Recycling Victoria, joins us for a chat. And we've got more in the Operation Sandon series, as I mentioned earlier, with a new episode featuring David Wolf. So check those out on YouTube or on your podcast player, and we'll keep you up to date with everything that's happening around the local government sector. Until next time, thanks for being with us, and bye for now.